Well, there you are. That's London, and it wasn't this morning, if you can tell, because it's dark. And I'm afraid that punching the buttons is still a bit beyond me. But nonetheless, I'm here still, and hopefully in the next half hour, I'm going to bring you something that you might find rather interesting. One of the great papers of Great Britain is the Financial Times. It's a paper of some substance. It is widely regarded as being an accurate paper. It concentrates on business, but it doesn't veer one way or the other in terms of bias. And it just so happens that Stuart Dolby cut his teeth there and was a Financial Times journalist for a good many years. So I'm going to actually just show you a little bit about the founder of this.
Actually, I can't stay on play.
Oh dear, he can't stay, and I'm just about to show his background. But there we are. These are the way the cookie crumbles. How are you, my boy?
I'm fine. Well, I'm not fine really, because I've got a real problem with my green barrel stuff. Anyway.
With your what?
My green barrel stuff.
Oh dear, dear. Did you see that the wind farmers shut down today?
Which wind farm?
The big one off the Norfolk Broads.
Has it been shut down?
It's been shut down.
Why is that?
They can't make it pay, according to the story.
Well,
It's in your Financial Times, if you've got your Financial Times with you.
I can't get it. That's very interesting.
Yeah. It's the big Norwegian one.
Oh, yeah, that's the one, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. You see, the point is, it's in the bloody North Sea. So, sending people out there to fix it.
Yeah.
People have died, you know.
It's been shut down. So I think that I said this morning when I reviewed the papers that you would be interested in that. So you go take a look. And if you get a chance to wander by later, let us know what you think.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
In the meantime, we're going to talk about the Financial Times, we hope. That is, if I can actually get my act together. And right now, that there is not very far from here, in a little town called Upper Dicker. In fact, it's a village. It's not a town at all. And that place is known as the Dicker. And that gentleman is a gentleman called Horatio Bottomley, who, towards the end of the last the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, was very active in British politics and was a great man for getting people to sign up into the army and go off to war in the First World War. And he had two magazines of note. One was John Bull and the other was the Financial Times. And he was very successful, but he was not at all liked by his fellow politicians, even though he was a great orator and really could whip people into enthusiasm. And this is Horatio Bottomley, and that's his magazine, John Bull. And I will explain to you in a moment. That's the Dicker where he lived. I'll explain to you in a moment what he was about and why he is so prominent. Let me see if I can find myself. Yes, there we go. Now, Horatio Bottomley started off as an orphan. He lost both his parents when he was 5 years of age. and while some relatives looked after him for a little while, they found it too much, and he was sent to an orphanage in Erdington. And this orphanage was a particularly tough one. The discipline was strict. The terms of living there were barbaric, we would consider today. But he survived. And he very quickly got himself a job as a clerk in Birmingham and in a law office. And he was a quick learn, and so he managed to pick up quite a few tips, which held him in good stead. And what he did with that was he formed several companies. And that's from a standing start. Admirable, you may say. And these companies were mostly publishing companies. But he also persuaded people to invest in Australian gold mines. Now, one of the great cons, the great swindles that people perpetrate is getting people to invest in get-rich-quick schemes overseas. And human greed being what it is they very quickly succumb and they buy into these things. I will go back to the Australian gold mines in a moment, but let me tell you about a more recent one, a modern one that happened in the 1990s here, and which I happened to cover as a journalist at Reuters. And Bradford City Council invested some money in a diamond mine, and they bought this diamond mine through the Vancouver Stock Exchange, which was the most deregulated or unregulated stock exchange anywhere in the world. And what it turned out to be was a betting company that had bought a couple of shares in a hole in the ground. And it was absolutely no whatever of any worth at all. And so the council ended with its egg on its face. Horatio Bottomley persuaded people to buy into gold mines in Australia, which were nothing more than holes in the ground. And as a consequence, he raked in huge fortunes, but there was nothing to substantiate them. But by that time, he was a wealthy man. He ran for Parliament. He became an MP. He was welcomed in the House, and the Speaker said that his method of oratory was charming and kept the House amused. But what he did was he then set out on a lavish lifestyle. And his lavish lifestyle saw him buy what was known as the Dicker, a house in the little village of Upper Dicker, which is no more than 5 miles from Lewis. Upper Dicker had a colourful history to begin with, because it had Mickleham Priory there that was owned by the Nevilles. And it is said that one particularly naughty Neville still has his ghost, because it is still in very good shape, wandering the corridors. But the monks were naughty monks, and often Rome had to send a delegation to try and sort them out and put them on the straight and narrow. And the monks had two things. One, they had a pub at the gate to the priory, in which they spent many years and probably singing songs similar to those in the Carmen of Urana, monks drinking songs. And secondly, they chased the girls in the village, much to the chagrin of the local boys and sometimes the fathers. So Upper Dicker was a very colourful place to begin with, and Horatio Bottomley settled there. And he built, or at least he converted, a huge mansion. That mansion is still there, and it is Bede's School. and it served his purpose for lavish parties, entertaining widely, and owning there a stable of racehorses. Horatio knew how to live. He even had a railway station built so that his guests could come and get off the train at the railway station and be ferried up to the house to attend his parties. He organized, or he had a company that published two newspapers. One was John Bull, which lasted until the 1960s, but it was a hurrah, hurrah type newspaper, very jingoistic. The British Empire will never fail. Being British is all that matters. We are the best, etc., 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 and which helped recruit youngsters into the army for the First World War. The other paper he founded was the Financial Times, which, as I said earlier, lasted until today. In fact, not only lasted until today, but is now a very substantial and highly regarded newspaper in which Aaron Stewart Dolby cut his teeth as a journalist. But what he did with these newspapers back in the turn of the century, and no implication to them now, is he sold war bonds through them and various lotteries, if you like. The only thing is that he was making sure that on these lotteries and on these bonds, that his employees were winning them and feeding them back to him so he could support his lifestyle. He may have got away with it, except his arrogance and his ego were such that when one of his colleagues flagged that he may be doing something rather naughty, he decided to sue. So all the critics and all the people who understood what was going on were brought to one place. And he was roundly shown to be a villain. And he was taken before the courts. And he was found guilty of being a swindler, dear Horatio. And he went to prison for 7 years. And when he came out, he tried hard to resurrect his business empire. And to gain money, he appeared on stage talking about his flamboyant past. But there's a generation who had forgotten who Horatio Bottomley was, even though he had been probably the most widely known man and popular man of his time in and around the First World War. He was bust, and he spent the last 7 years of his life in poverty. Now, much of this took place just near to us, just down the road from us in Lewis. And I'm going to play you this little clip again, just so that you can be reminded about who Horatio Bottomley was. Now I've told you about it, and where he actually lived. Quite the gent. and very popular with the armed forces, very popular with the army's generals and so on, because he was so good at recruiting. But he ended up in court. Now, he managed to actually get himself acquitted a couple of times before they actually caught him. And that was his magazine, John Bull. And you could get £1,000, it said, by investing as little as one. The Daily Mirror saw him as an important figure. And as I said, well, there's the Dicker, which is now a Bede's school. But it was his house where he entertained lavishly and had his racehorses, his racing stables. So that is Horatio Bottomley. And it is, I think, important that we, from time to time, take a look at the very colourful people that have populated this part of the world. Horatio being one of them. And a fascinating man, an absolutely fascinating man. Taught the birds out of the trees. And one has to admire the fact that he came from a very, very poor background. He was a self-made man, but he was also an opportunist. And he could see the weaknesses of his fellow man in as much as they couldn't wait to fill their pockets with a fast buck. And that's how he appealed to these people. And we're not just talking about people on the street. Many of these investors were noted people of the day. They were landed gentry. They were politicians. They were business people. They all bought in to his schemes. It was a good ploy, as indeed Bradford City Council found. Somebody selling a mine, a diamond mine, is they sell it 8,000 miles away in British Columbia. It's very difficult to check on your investment. Gold mines in Australia are even more difficult to check. And so it's easy, very easy to dupe people. In my time and on a separate program, I relate my relationship with the mafia in British Columbia. One of the things that the mafia there would do is they would float a mine on the penny stocks. You can buy a share for a dime, 10 cents. And they would put in reports on how well these mines were doing, but you couldn't get anywhere near to the mines. What they did was they put their hoods, the foot soldiers, the mafia foot soldiers, with shotguns around the premises where the mines were supposedly located, gave them a box of dynamite and said, throw this onto the permafrost, make a big bang, and then we'll report that drilling and exploration for these mines, which could be anything from gold to copper to precious metals. And that way, more and more people will invest, and we'll pocket the money, and away we'll go. And there was nothing there at all. It's just a plot of land guarded by mafia hoods. So it is easy to set that sort of thing up, but when your investors are is 8,000 miles away. And that's what Horatio did. And without looking too closely into the matter, many people put in a huge amount of money, which he converted to champagne, bright lights, racehorses, into building a reputation for being one of the leading socialites of his day. It all came tumbling down when, if he'd have kept his cool and hadn't let his ego get out of control, he would probably have been suspected but not discovered as being the swindler that he was. Horatio is the fact that the Dicker, his house, is still extant, is still being used as a school. And strange enough, I was talking to some people. They weren't students, I think they were parents of students. And I mentioned the history of Bede's School, and they hadn't a clue. They did not know its very colourful and interesting history in this little village of Upper Dicker. So when you next pick up a copy of the Financial Times, look closely at it. Respectable newspaper though it is, it came from a very interesting background, a very flamboyant man, a man who at one stage looked as if he might well have become a minister. In fact, it was widely expected that he would actually perhaps become the Minister of War in the First World War. It didn't materialize, but he was mooted. He was known by everybody and admired by many, and many saw him as making their fortune before the whole thing went sour. Another colourful character that I shall talk about one morning was Mad Jack Fuller. We have actually a little documentary on Mad Jack. It shall also play. But Mad Jack was MP for Lewis. And at one stage, the speaker of his day, and he was towards the end of the 1800s, and Mad Jack fell out with the speaker and called him a pipsqueak, for which he was banned from Parliament for a couple of weeks. But Mad Jack was an exponent of slavery. He made his fortune on slave-held plantations in the West Indies. He also did an enormous amount of good. He invested in Faraday's cage. What's Faraday's cage, you may say? Faraday's cage was the experiments that undertaken by a physicist called Faraday. And it was to do with how radio waves could pass through or not pass through various elements. And without it, we would not have had television. It was the early experimentation for television. So for those people who like to pull down statues, not that there are too many of Mad Jack, of slavers, his immense wealth came from slavery, and he helped create television. He created the first Eastbourne lifeboat and the first Eastbourne lighthouse. He built follies, which can still be seen all over this part of the world. And I think it was Hever Castle. Bodiam Castle. He paid for its restoration, so it is the fine building that it is today. We have many, many characters of this court in this part of the world, or have had. Their names are still here. Fuller Passage in Lewis is named directly after Mad Jack. He lived in the village, or his home base was the village of Brightling in the eastern part of Sussex. And his diaries show that he was a very good laird, a very good squire. And each Christmas, he made sure that the fatted calf was slaughtered so that the village and the villagers had a very good Christmas meal. And Rupert Lloyd Thomas, who is a well-known character around this village, around Lewis for a long time. His wife, Annette, has written the definitive book on Mad Jack. Look for it in the bookstores. But I will outline to you Mad Jack, much as I outlined to you Horatio Bottomley one morning, because these are people we should not forget. Yes, they were rogues in their own way, but they also contributed towards the wonderful sense of history, the wonderful things that happened here that made people feel good about themselves, even if they were naughty boys underneath. Okay, it's 10 o'clock, sorry. We'll be back with Melissa Conti pretty soon. But for the moment, we'll take another brief break, and hope that you'll join us a little later. So for the moment, as Mad Jack and Horatio Bottomley would probably have said, is Toodle-pip.